Hello everyone, a very warm welcome to each and every one of you. My name is Pratik and I'll be taking up the news today discussion for 14th of October. In the main news, the first news is NITI Aayog report on deep sea fisheries. So here we'll look into the concept of blue economy and the status of India's fisheries sector and what measures NITI Aayog has suggested to improve upon this sector. In the second news, we'll talk about the Economics Nobel Prize of 2025, where we'll talk about the concept of innovation-led growth, right? Third topic is IUCN Green Status of Species Assessment for Tiger released. So we'll talk about the concept or the idea of IUCN Green Status, and we'll also look into the conservation status of tiger. Fourth, this is the news on 4 year of the Prime Minister GatiShakti National Master Plan. So within this plan, several initiatives have been undertaken, and we'll talk about the importance of logistics and infrastructure sector here. Fifth news is about Civil Registration System Report 2023 released. So it talks about some of the important data of demographic, including the birth rate, death rate, etc. And we'll look into some of the trends related to that. Then we have certain quick updates, and we have place in news. We'll be discussing Madagascar. So the first news is India's Blue Economy Strategy for Deep Sea and Offshore Fisheries report by NITI Aayog. This report can be considered as something that is relevant from General Studies Paper 3, Economics section. And we need to understand the concept here that what are some of the status or the challenges as far as the fisheries sector is concerned as far as India is there, right? So when it comes to the fisheries sector, India has or is endowed, or as per the PIB report, India is the second largest producer of fishes or fisheries in the world, right? And India also have a significant presence as far as the coastline is concerned. So if you look into the NCRTs, it talks about that India's coastline is around 7,500 kilometers roughly, but recently this number has been expanded. It is now around 11,000 kilometers according to the recent updates from the geospatial data. Right. So the point is that India has huge potential when it comes to the fisheries sector. Secondly, at the same time, we can say that even though the fisheries sector is quite profound in India, we have not fully explored the option of deep sea fishing. So our option is mostly, or our fisheries is largely dominated by the inland fisheries, right? Our deep sea fishing sector is currently not that explored. So NITI Aayog has explored this whole aspect, and it has flagged certain critical gaps in this regard and provided certain solutions. Additionally, this is very important with respect to the concept of blue economy. So blue economy, again, is one of the most important concepts related to the utilization of the ocean resources. So in general, we think of ocean as a reservoir of resources like fishes and other marine organism, right? So it is definitely a huge source of reserves. At the same time, it has resources like fossil fuels, etc. So in a way, blue economic concept was given in the Rio Plus 20 summit in the year 2012. Okay, so this part is important because this concept started from 2012, and it is essentially about the sustainable utilization of ocean resources. So ocean can be a very good source for all these marine resources plus fossil fuels. At the same time, it can also serve as a source for shipment, right? It can act as an infrastructure as well. So it is essential for transit and transportation. Then the other way in which it is very useful is with respect to tourism potential. So it has huge tourism potential, and it is also a very crucial source for biodiversity. Right. So in light of this, the Sustainable Development Goal corresponding to UN has a corresponding and a specific dedicated SDG related to it, that is SDG 14, right? That is life below water. Okay, so this is the concept of blue economy, and India's approach is to align itself with the idea of blue economy. So when we look into the status of this, the report talks about or present a comprehensive framework. Essentially, it talks about the deep sea fishing sector, which basically is part of India's exclusive economic zone. So as you all know, according to the UN Convention of Law and Seas, there are three ways in which an ocean floor or structure can be divided. So first is your territorial sector, then the second one is with respect to the exclusive economic zone, and third is open seas. So in the territorial sea, there is no problem with respect to regulatory aspect, but here the exclusive economic zone has certain issues, right? So here you cannot unrestrictively use or utilize the resources. There are certain regulatory aspects that need to be taken into consideration, right? So here there are two things that we need to consider: that India is very well efficient when it comes to the fishery sector of the inland waters, but at the deep sea level, we need to take a lot of measures. And then this strategy is very critical, very important as far as blue economy is concerned, because it is a core growth area. It has a potential for $100 billion blue economy by 2030. So if you look at it, $100 billion is going to give a lot of dividend if we are able to utilize it effectively. Now, when it comes to the findings of the report, the overall potential is estimated at 7.616 million tons of fishes. With respect to the fishes, they have identified this much is the potential, but the potential remains largely untapped. Now, the problem with respect to this is with respect to three key issues or three key gaps. One is with respect to the infrastructure. Second is with respect to technology, and third is with respect to the regulation, right? So there are three gaps. So with respect to the infrastructure, only 90 fishing harbors are adequately equipped to handle large deep sea vessels. So deep sea vessels require some sort of large or deep places to initially provide for some sort of for proper handling, right? So here in India, we have very limited harbors which provide for deep sea vessels. And as a result of that, a lot of our potential, a lot of our ships are diverted to Sri Lankan seaports, right? So this is one of the major infrastructure bottlenecks. So infrastructural bottleneck. Then the second part is with respect to the technological gaps. So what are the technological gaps? We do not have efficient utilization of the resources because there is technological challenge. And third, there is problem with respect to the regulatory gaps. So India currently lacks specific regulatory gaps for fishing activities, especially within the EEZ, which is up to 200 nautical miles, contributing to what is called as illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing concerns. So these are the three major concerns which India currently faces, particularly with respect to the deep sea or fishing or utilization of resources. Okay. Then what are some of the key initiatives that India has already undertaken? So with respect to these three gaps, which is regulatory gap, infrastructure gap, and with respect to the financial, or not the financial, but with respect to the technological gaps, the government has initiated the Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana, which is the flagship initiative for the fisheries sector, right? So under this, what government provides is, so it's a 5-year scheme which is supposed to be going from 2021 to 2024-2025, and the core investment is close to 20,000 crore. And under this, the government provides what financial support, including up to 60% financial assistance to traditional fishermen for converting or acquiring deep sea and offshore fishing vessels. So essentially, this is going to create infrastructure, right? And it is also going to increase the technology or improve the technology, especially with respect to deep sea fishing. Okay, so in a way, this Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana is ensuring that these two problems are taken care of. Along with that, there is also other schemes such as the first one is, or the other one significant one is, Fisheries and Aquaculture Infrastructure Development Fund. So we know that there is need for development of infrastructure, which includes development of ports, which includes development of the whole logistics sector. For that purpose, Fisheries and Aquaculture Infrastructure Development Fund is provided. Now, what do you mean by aquaculture? See, in very simple term, aquaculture can be considered as agriculture of fishes, right? So in a way, just like in agriculture, the farmers provide or sow this seed and then harvest the crops, and all the aspects are done. In aquaculture also, the same process is done for the fishes, right? So, and all for the other marine organisms as well, right? So here there's a planned way in which the marine organisms are harvested and cultivated for commercial purposes, right? It is also very significant with respect to export. The National Fisheries Policies 2020 essentially is a combination of all the inland and the marine fishes policies that we had earlier. It combines it all, and it provides for a specific way in which all these measures can be done to promote and protect the interest of the fishermen. So in a way, it promotes inclusive development. It also promotes sustainable development, right? So with respect to the report, so the report talks about multi-phase roadmap. So it has several phases, including policy overhauls, because in these two terms, in all these measures, three measures that we have talked about, they largely talk about the financial measures, they talk about the technical measures, they talk about the infrastructure measures. This is largely silent, or they do not directly talk about the policy or regulatory gaps. Therefore, NITI Aayog has talked about the regulatory mechanism, what can be done to effectively ensure the implementation. So in order to implement something well, what we need is some plan of action, and we need a dedicated body to ensure that the whole process or plan of action is being done effectively. And for that purpose, NITI Aayog has provided policy overhauls, and it has also given suggestion for fleet modernization. This is supposed to increase the efficiency and reduce the logistics cost. Also, the report recommends that all subsidies should be kept to a minimum and phased out as soon as possible. Again, this is in line with the vision of NITI Aayog, because NITI Aayog does not believe in providing subsidies after subsidies. It ensures, or it talks about providing governance reforms, providing effective monitoring of resources and implementation. The same approach is also done in the aspirational districts program, if you have read about it, because there itself the whole approach is about convergence, it's about cooperation and ensuring that there is healthy competition, right? So this is all about the first topic. Let's discuss the second topic, that is Economics Nobel Prize 2025, which of course is important from the perspective of economy. And it has been awarded to three gentlemen, Joel Mokyr, Philip Aghion, and Peter Howitt, for explaining the innovation-driven economic growth. Now, there's an assumption today that economic growth is something that we take for granted, that year after year there has to be some sort of economic growth. But it has not been the case all the time. In fact, 2 centuries before, there was not economic growth as such. It was in fact economic stagnation. So what explains the continuous growth of economy? What could be the single most important source or important factor? So these scientists or these economists have provided the answer in the form of innovation. So here what has happened is that the Nobel Prize is divided not equally among the three. Here, the half of the prize is given to Joel Mokyr, and the rest half is given or divided in these two economists, right? So Joel Mokyr has identified the prerequisite. What are some of the important conditions that lead to sustained growth? And then the other two have provided for the theory of sustained growth through creative destruction, right? So let's take a look about what they have provided. So the first argument is or the first contribution is by Joel Mokyr, who has provided the idea of innovation, that why or how innovation leads to economic growth. So prior to industrial revolution, there was no sustained economic growth because most of the knowledge that we created were not applied in a very commercial way. It was also not very sustained, and the focus of the knowledge was majorly in a way in an academic manner. It was not for commercial purpose. So Joel Mokyr has provided for all the mechanisms that enable the scientific breakthrough, including the industrial revolution and practical application, to enhance and create a self-generating process. So what are the three preconditions that are required? So here's first is continuous flow of useful knowledge. So here you talk about two aspects: propositional knowledge and prescriptive knowledge. So whenever we talk about the how of something, how something is done, right, then we are talking about the prescriptive knowledge, right? So if we know about a concept like how a steam engine runs, so you want to apply that principle. So the how part is basically part of prescriptive knowledge, describes what is necessary for something to work. But even more fundamental question to ask is why, and that is the domain of propositional knowledge. Propositional knowledge talks about why something works, why steam engine works, right? So first question that you would need to ask here is, what is steam engine? How does steam engine work? And third would be why steam engine works. So once you identify the why part, you can use the analogical thinking process and apply it in a different context. So this knowledge or this huge part is called contextual analogy, where you apply concept from one domain to that of other domain. And this analogy can only be understood if you know the reason, underlying reason why something works. Okay. So earlier, the whole emphasis was on prescriptive knowledge, but through the industrial revolution and largely the innovation is also facilitating, or it is facilitated by the propositional knowledge, right? The why of things. The second part is commercial knowledge. So knowledge should not remain in the confines of the academics. It should have some practical purpose to solve, right? Otherwise, knowledge becomes stagnant. It remains with the elites. It does not translate into any major commercial action, right? So commercial knowledge is very important to transform ideas into commercial products, right? Third, societal openness to change. So society needs to adapt to change. It needs to think it does not should consider any major it should not oppose an idea just because it may be against their religion or their common sense, or maybe against the present dogma of that time. So the society also needs to change along with the scientific discovery. It needs to embrace new ideas. So according to Joel Mokyr, these are the three key components for innovation to sail through, and essentially these are the things that provide for economic growth in a sustained manner. Now, what are the contribution of the other two economists, Philip Aghion and Peter Howitt? So they formulated a concept or mathematical model to explain the concept of creative destruction. Not you tell me who has given the concept of creative destruction. So they did not come up with the concept of creative destruction, but some other scientist or scholar was associated with the concept of creative destruction. But what they did was they provided a mathematical model to prove the hypothesis of creative destruction. So what exactly is the idea of creative destruction? The arrival of new and better products in the market causes companies offering older versions to lose out their competitiveness or exit the market. And this is something that we observe on a day-to-day basis. A better product comes and the earlier products goes away, right? So a creative destruction part is very important because it allows for, in a way, survival of the fittest. The best product, the most competitive product survives, and those which are not able to survive because it is offering a suboptimal experience, it goes out. So it is called creative because it builds up on innovation, For example, iPhone is considered to be creative because all the other smartphones were fine. They were being able to do a lot of things, but iPhone combined a lot of things built upon years of research, right? So it drive down a lot of, or it destroyed a lot of other smartphone businesses in the wake, including BlackBerry and maybe Nokia phones as well. So this was a creative act, but it was also destructive because older products become obsolete and lose their commercial value, because nobody would want to hold on to something because of the reason that it used to have some utility in the past, right? So creative destruction again is a very important component of innovation. So this is the reason why the Nobel Prize were awarded to these gentlemen. Now, in terms of PYQ, since this is a question on on economic growth, and UPSC has asked questions on economic growth several times, but this is a very specific type of question which talks about how economic growth can increase. So in 2022, UPSC asked a question that economic growth in the recent past has been led by increase in labor productivity. Explain this statement, suggests the growth pattern that will create or lead to creation of more jobs without compromising labor productivity. So you can use innovation as a tool that can enhance labor productivity on one hand, and it can also yield other dividend as well, right? So you can use this information that we have discussed as part of providing more arguments to substantiate your points. Next topic is first IUCN Green Status Report or Status of Species Assessment for the tiger released. Again, this is part of GS Paper 3 Environment. So a lot of topics from GS Paper 3. So what is the assessment all about? The assessment classified the tiger as critically depleted. So you may have heard about critically endangered, threatened, vulnerable, but these are not part of, or these are part of IUCN red list or red classification, but this is basically green list, right? Or this is something which is called as green status. So this green status of the species has classified tiger as critically depleted, right? So this is one of the categories of classification, right? So why this is called critically depleted? Because it reflects the historical and the ongoing threats that the tiger faces, as a species it faces, and it is because of direct threats like poaching and indirect threats like habitat loss, like loss of prey, etc., right? So this can be considered as why they have been classified as critically depleted. Now, what are the key findings? The population trend is on decreasing trend. Current estimate that the mature tigers are around 2,608 to 3,905. Tigers are now extinct in 9 out of 24 areas evaluated and are threatened in all the spatial units where they still persist. And status of conservation legacy is high and the recovery potential is medium. So now let's take a look into the report, the nature of report, what it says about the IUCN Green Status of Species. So it was launched in 2012, right? It builds upon the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species. So in 2020, it became an optional part of Red List assessment. So earlier, it has to be released along with the Red List of Threatened Species. But from 2020, it became optional. Then it provides a tool. So what exactly is the importance of this? It provides a tool for assessing the recovery of species population and conservation impact alongside extinction risk. So the most important takeaway from this is that in the IUCN Red List, it was largely, you can say that it is static in nature because it just talked about whether this species is threatened or extinct in wild or critically endangered. So it can be considered as a very static concept, but this is something which is more dynamic in nature because it also looks into the potential of further revival in the future in terms of the recovery, in terms of conservation aspect. So it is more broader in nature. The category includes largely depleted, moderately depleted, slightly depleted, fully recovered, etc. So how does the green status define species recovery? A species is fully recovered if it is present in all parts of its historical range, including the areas lost due to human impact. Second, it is viable, that is not at risk of extinction across its range. And third, it performs its ecological function in all parts of its range. So mere survival is not enough. It also needs to perform its ecological function along with niche, whatever is there with respect to all parts of the range. So this is the criteria that is used to check the fully recovered status. And in terms of that, there is a green score is given to all these species with respect to this, which has a score from 0 to 100, indicating how close a species is to full recovery, right? So if all these conditions are met, then it gets a score of 100%. With respect to tiger, which is scientific name is Panthera tigris, the tiger is the largest wildcat in the world, and India has almost 3/4 or the 75% of world's wild tiger population. And some of the range countries include Bangladesh, Bhutan, China, India, Indonesia, etc. What are their habitats? So they generally are seen in forest, in savanna, that is the grassland, shrubland, grassland, wetlands, that is inland, etc. If you look at the conservation status, they have the endangered category under the IUCN Red List, Schedule 1 species under the Wildlife Protection Act 1972, and it is also part of CITES Appendix 1. Now you tell me, what are the measures that the government has undertaken to conserve tiger? Of course, there's Project Tiger, but tell me other measures that the government has taken apart from Project Tiger to conserve tiger population. Next, fourth news, that is 4 years of the Prime Minister GatiShakti National Master Plan. So under this, or this 4th year anniversary, government has launched several initiatives. In fact, it has launched 5 initiatives which are very much aligned with the plan and the objective and the philosophy of the scheme. But before we go ahead, let us understand what are the underlying problems with respect to the infrastructure sector of India. So this was the Prime Minister GatiShakti National Master Plan was launched in 2021. Okay, so there has been 4 years now. So why when it was launched, there were several problems that the infrastructure faced. So first was with respect to the approach of the government. So government used to make decisions in a siloed approach, which meant that if one government agency was responsible for laying down the roads, the other one would not consult on it and it would lay down pipes, right? So there was no effective coordination among the government agency. Second, there was no way in which monitoring of tasks was done. So it was done randomly. There was no targeted approach. There was no monitoring framework. Thirdly, there was no digital device that was used. It was mostly it was done manually, right? And there was no nodal agency that would go and regulate and monitor the implementation of the plan. So in light of these challenges, this GatiShakti plan was launched, right? And essentially the meaning of Gati is, if you know, it is speed. Gati stands for speed and Shakti stands for strength. So speed equal to strength, and speed leading to strength, and strength leading to speed. So this was the vision, that we need to work in a very speedier manner. We need to increase the speed of implementation. We also need to ensure that the infrastructure becomes more viable in the country. The logistics cost could be reduced, because these are some of the most essential aspects of increasing the economic growth of a country, right? So in line with that, this initiative was launched. And now government has said that we will be translating this from a physical infrastructure project to a social infrastructure project, in a way that we will not just be focused on creation of roads, ports, and airports, but we will also be looking into the social cost or the human aspect of these creations, so that there shall be some sort of development along the way, especially with respect to the backward district. So because of that reason, some other modification has been done along in this particular program. So the GatiShakti program has revolutionized infrastructure planning and implementation. So both planning part and implementation. So planning is done at the macro level and the implementation is done at the micro level, at the bottom level. By integrating geospatial data from more than 57 central ministries, departments, and states, right? So it has taken into data from several ministries so that their congruence can be done and their convergence can happen, and they can understand that, okay, this is their requirement and we cannot, or we need to approach this in a collaborative manner. Then what are the 7 engines of NMP, which is very significant? Railways. So you will construct railways, roads, ports, waterways, airports, mass transport, and logistics infrastructure. So these are the 7 pillars of or engines of the NMP. Now, with respect to this, several initiatives have been recently announced. So let us take a look into these 5 initiatives. So first initiative that is announced is PM GatiShakti Public. So it has opened the GatiShakti NMP platform to the private sector. And this is developed by Bhaskaracharya National Institute for Space Application and Geoinformatics and powered by National Geospatial Data Registry, NGDR. Now, what is the importance of this? It is going to provide wider access to the geospatial data and advanced analytics. To whom? To the private sector as well. So the private sector, which is also one of the key stakeholder in the development, will be able to closely monitor the progress of any particular project, right? So this is going to provide certainty and clarity to the private sector. Second, PM GatiShakti Offshore. So first understand the concept of offshore and onshore. So when we say offshore, it depends, like the meaning changes with respect to the concept in which we are talking about. So with respect to economics, with respect to finance, offshore versus onshore means, offshore means outside the country and onshore means domestic country, right? But with respect to logistics or with respect to the energy sector, offshore basically means towards or outside the shores or opposite from the shore, and onshore basically means that it is towards the land, right? So offshore projects are generally done for the windmill or the wind projects or for other sectors such as marine resources, coastal infrastructure, and onshore can be for the solar projects, right? So here the PM GatiShakti is also helping, or with which it will be implemented for the offshore sector as well, right? So dedicated digital platform will be provided for integrated planning and management of offshore development across multiple sectors. Now, this is also one of the important aspects of India's blue economy, like we just discussed in the first topic. It involves data-driven decision-making for offshore projects that include wind farms, marine resources, and coastal infrastructure. So this is the second policy that is discussed as part of this initiative. Third initiative that is announced is PMGS District Master Plan. And under this, for the 112 aspirational districts, data-driven local infrastructure development and holistic regional growth will be promoted. So essentially, this talks about bottom-up approach where the regional sensitivity and regional variation will be taken into consideration, right? So it supports area-based planning. Depending on the area, depending on the terrain of certain areas, planning will be modified accordingly, and it includes several sectors like health, education, logistics, industrial development, environmental management, right? So in a way, we can say that now the GatiShakti project is moving towards from social infrastructure to from physical infrastructure to social infrastructure. Third, and the fourth one is about LEAPS, that is Logistics Excellence Advancement and Performance Shield 2025. So this will recognize outstanding leaders and innovation across logistics sector. So we have already discussed how innovation plays a huge role in economic growth. So LEAPS award essentially will provide for for recognizing the leadership and innovation. So both these aspects are important. Moreover, it will also emphasize what is called as sustainability and ESG, that is environmental, social and governance practice and green logistics, right? So this is again a very good initiative. Fifth is about PMGS NMP dashboard, which is about multi-sector reporting system. Now, the purpose here is for monitoring the development. So we have talked about several good initiatives, but it will not be effective unless we measure them on ground, right? And for that purpose, we have this dashboard. And this will also help in deriving actionable insights based on the pattern that we observe from here, right? Now, what are the key achievements of the Prime Minister GatiShakti NMP? So, first is in quantitable or quantifiable way. We have over 600 projects have been planned and mapped on the PM GatiShakti portal. Second, Network Planning Group's NPG has evaluated over 300 major infrastructure projects. And third, all 36 states or UTs have developed State Master Plans portal aligned with the National Master Plan. Right. Apart from that, there have been several other development as well, which means that there has been very faster creation of infrastructure projects. It has also led to reduction of the logistics sector, and more importantly, it has made doing business in India more cost effective. So this is the underlying benefit of the GatiShakti project. If you look at the previous year question, UPSC had asked a direct question on this, but interestingly, that question was not asked in GS paper 3. It was basically a question that was asked from the perspective of governance. So the question was, the GatiShakti Yojana needs meticulous coordination between the government and the private sector to achieve the goal of connectivity discussed. So we have seen that how GatiShakti is a very important and a revolutionary way to improve upon the infrastructure projects in the country. It has 7 engines we have discussed, but it also had several issues with respect to the siloed approach earlier, and then with respect to the private sector that was not effectively consulted. Now, but here we have discussed this the very first scheme and initiative, that is GatiShakti Public. Now the spatial data, geospatial data will also be shared with the private sector. So this is going to be a very important way in which we can strengthen the whole operation of this scheme, right? So we can also add other points as well. Next news, vital statistics of India based on civil registration system CRS report 2023 released, and this is released by Office of Registrar General and Census Commissioner, which basically functions within the Ministry of Home Affairs. It can be considered as part of General Studies paper 1 or GS paper 2 social issues, right? So here you will see that every few times or every few months, there will be some reports that will talk about some of the important demographic data of the country, right? Which includes the birth rate, death rate, sex ratio at birth, etc., literacy rate, etc. So the purpose of these report for you as a UPSC aspirant is not to memorize these numbers, even though some of the numbers are important, especially if it comes in census. But what is important for you to understand is the trend, right? What exactly is the trend? Is the number on the increasing side or is it on the decreasing trend? So you have to make a comparison with the previous one as well. So numbers looking in isolation will not give you too much sense. So you have to look into the trend as with respect to the stakeholder. First, which social agent am I talking about? And second, you have to also take a look in terms of the regional variation. So which region is providing this kind of trend, right? So these will become important. So if you look at the numbers, sex ratio at birth, excluding Sikkim, was 928 per females per 1,000 males. Now you tell me, what was the sex ratio at birth in India as per census 2011? What was that, right? So with respect to highest, it was Arunachal Pradesh, 1085. In fact, if you look at the sex, the trend was that most of the northeastern states had a very progressive, very favorable sex ratio right? So sex ratio, as you all know, is the number of females per 1,000 males. So here this was 1085 in Arunachal Pradesh, and after that I think it was Nagaland. So the northeastern states had done really well with respect to the sex ratio. With respect to the lowest sex ratio, it was Jharkhand, that was at 899, and after that it was Bihar with 900, right? So this is again a trend that we see, that in less prosperous state the sex ratio is on the declining side, but again that's a paradox we'll discuss very soon. Then with respect to births, number of registered birth decreased by 0.9%. So what was the trend with respect to birth? It has reduced. How much by which it has reduced? By 0.9% compared to what? Compared to 2022. And the level of registration of birth is 98.4%, which is a significant increase. Then the birth registered in urban areas was higher than rural areas, possibly because there is more awareness and they can use this as a documentation purpose as well. Third, with respect to death rate, number of registered death increased. So here birth rate had decreased, but the number of deaths registered were increased by how much? By 0.1% by 2022. Interestingly, the CRS did not mention any COVID-related trend that would increase the death rate. So level of registration of death was 97.2%. Death rate registered in rural area was higher. So death rate was higher in the rural areas, but birth rate is higher in the urban areas. Again, this is a very interesting trend that is there, right? So can you tell me what exactly is the reason behind this? Why the death rate that is registered is higher in the urban areas, rural areas as compared to the urban areas, right? Then infant deaths increased from 2022, and 21 and 19 states UTs have achieved 100% level of registration of births and deaths respectively. Primarily the southern states have done that, and birth and death registration for males was higher than females in both rural and urban areas, right? So again, if we unpack this trend, a lot of interesting concepts, a lot of interesting anecdotes and analysis could stem out from this. So in isolation, this is not important, but if we look into it, if we reflect upon these data, we can get a lot of interesting trends. So let's talk about CRS. It is a unified process for recording of vital events. So we have, during the lifetime, there are several important events like birth, like marriage, migration, death, etc. So it measures all the important milestones, but it does not measure marriages and divorce. Apart from that, it measures births and deaths. Still birth, but not marriage and divorce. Under the registration of births and deaths, so it is under registration of births and deaths 1969, it is compulsory to report births and deaths to registrar. So 2023 amendment has enabled the digital registration, creation of national and state databases, etc. Now let me show you a question that UPSC asked from this particular topic, that is of demographics and the trends related to it. So this question was, why do some of the most prosperous regions of India, so what prosperous regions of India could be? It could be Haryana, it could be Gujarat, have an adverse sex ratio for women, right? So the question is about a paradox that says that even though some of the states are highly developed, but when it comes to the sex ratio at birth, they're not that high. So what could be some of the reasons behind that? Now you tell me what could be some of the reasons behind this. Now let's talk about the new places in news. The first place that we are going to talk about is Madagascar. And why it was in news? Because anti-government Gen Z protest has happened in Madagascar, led to the fall of the government, right? And this can be seen as in the line of the other protests that is happening in different countries, like in Nepal and back then in Bangladesh and other areas. So what is more important here is that what is the location. So if we are considering this from the position or from the perspective of the location, so we'll understand some of the key geographical and physical location feature of Madagascar. So the political feature is that it is of course part of the Indian Ocean region. It is of the southeast part of Africa. Its maritime boundaries with Comoros, France, that is Reunion Island, and Mauritius, Mozambique, and Seychelles. When it comes to the geographical features, it is the fourth largest island in the world. And the three most largest islands in the world are: first is Greenland, second, New Guinea, third is Borneo. It has high endemism, which means that approximately 90% of the Madagascar flora and fauna is found nowhere else. It is completely indigenous. And now, why this happens is because of Madagascar's isolation from Africa by ocean currents. Then the southwest monsoon cycle also starts near the Madagascar with the Mascarene High, pushing the southeasterly winds. And after crossing the equator, these southeast winds become moisture-laden southwest wind westerlies heading towards India. Right. So this is basically the onset of monsoon in India. Let's now talk about the quick updates. So first news is about Israel-Gaza peace deal. So you may have heard or you may have seen that the Trump's 20-point plan has succeeded in a way. The first phase is succeeded. And within this, the first plan was that there is some sort of confidence building measures between the two sides. And the first part of this was release of hostages. So as of now, the release of hostages has taken place and Israel has withdrawn from the Gaza city and to a designated yellow line. So here, all the 20 or 40 odds hostages that the Hamas had captured from Israel was released, and Israel has also done so. This is going to be a significant development of the phase one of the plan. So the war, as we know, that lasted 2 years since October 7, 2023, but the peace remains fragile. So what exactly is the Israel-Hamas ceasefire and peace deal? So it is based on the US President Donald Trump 20-point plan, including first ceasefire, Israeli withdrawal to agreed lines, that is the yellow line, and release of all the hostages. It is mediated by not just USA but also by Egypt. In fact, there was a summit held in Sharm el-Sheikh, Qatar, and Turkey. So what is India's stand? So Prime Minister Modi has congratulated Donald Trump on his effort, and the Government of India has welcomed the peace efforts for regional peace and stability, supporting multilateral democracy. It reinforces India's balanced West Asia policy, maintaining ties with Israel, Palestine, and Arab nation. In fact, India has again re-endorsed its policy on this matter, which is the two-state policy. Then second news is about Port Pasni, why it was in news. Recently, Pakistan has offered the US the opportunity to develop and operate Port Pasni as per reports. The port is envisaged as gateway of US to Pakistan's critical minerals. Right, so we know that Gwadar is where China is building on its, or it is located, or China has taken up this port to develop it as part of its Belt and Road Infrastructure Initiative. And this is basically in very much nearer to the Gwadar port. So location is in Gwadar district only in Balochistan province along the Arabian Sea. What is the strategic significance? It is located close to 70 miles from the China operated Gwadar port and 178 miles away from Iran's Chabahar port. So again, there can be a news where they can give you to map out or provide east to west location of these ports. Its location makes it ideal hub for trade routes linking South, West, and Central Asia. And of course, there's also reports or rumors that it is also a place where rare earth elements have been projected or expected to discover or get. So maybe this is some of the ways where China wants to increase its strategic relation with that of US, right? Third is about inflation, where India's retail inflation has reduced to about 1% less than 2%, and it is lowest since June 2017. Now, the scholars have said that it is primarily due to the base effects and falling food prices. However, the core inflation has rose sharply In fact, it is more than 2-year high because of the higher demand for gold and silver. Why? Because of the upcoming Diwali festivals, right? Or so right. So this is basically about the trend. We don't need to know the exact details with respect to what exactly is the number, but from the perspective of prelims and even for mains, we need to understand how the whole concepts work. We need to understand the concept, we need to understand the trend, right? So inflation is measured through CPI, not WPI. So earlier it used to be measured through WPI, that is wholesale price inflation, but now it is measured through CPI, which measures the monthly change in price for a basket of goods and services. Now you tell me, what is the difference between CPI and WPI? It is released by Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, MOSPI. What is core inflation? Core inflation is an inflation or inflationary measures that leaves out energy and food. So two things it removes. Why? Because energy and food are highly unpredictable in nature. So it only focuses on the items that are fairly predictable, so that a particular way of analysis can be done, which removes the highly unpredictable items, right? So RBI's tolerance band for CPI inflation is 4%, and it can go higher than 2% or less than 2%. So essentially it means that from 2% to 6%. So inflation is a good thing when it is under moderation. If it is extremely high, then it is not good for the consumers. And if it is extremely less, then it is not good for the producers. Next news, key initiatives unveiled by RBI. So recently, RBI has announced key initiatives such as Unified Lending Interface, CBDC Retail Sandbox, pilot for tokenization of certificate of deposit. So what exactly is the meaning of these things? So in very basic terms, ULI is like it takes data from various sources, from government sources, from private sources, to check the credibility of the lenders, right? Because some of the people want to take money or they want to get or credit, right? But in order to assess whether the person is risk worthy or whether the person is credit worthy, if the government has certain ways to ensure that, okay, this person, some credit history is there, and it is they can understand the credit worthiness or the risk profile of that person, then it enhances the delivery of credit. So ULI essentially is to be designed as a public data infrastructure that is going to enhance the delivery of credit. Second is about CBDC Retail Sandbox. So CBDC is nothing but a digital version of fiat currencies issued by central banks. So it is considered to be e-rupee, right? So central bank deposit currency, digital currency, CBDC. So it is for the fintech firms to innovate and test solution. Essentially, they will build up some application on top of the APIs and see what can be done. Again, this is done for the innovation purpose and how e-rupee can be further utilized for various other application. Third is with respect to tokenization of these CDs, that is certificate of deposits. So first, let's understand the meaning of tokenization. So what is tokenization? Tokenization is the process of creating a digital representation of a real world assets. It can be stock or it can be any other financial instrument, and it is done on a blockchain. Now, the purpose why this is done, why tokenization done, is because it makes the whole stock or asset more transparent in nature, and all the benefits that happen because of a distributed ledger can also be applied in terms of the tokenization of that asset. So in a way, in very simple term, we can consider tokenization as a way of providing a digital representation of a actual financial asset, right? And the purpose is transparency. Now, what is CD or certificate of deposit? So when a bank lends to any financial or any corporate, right? So it takes up some money from the borrowers, so that is the deposits. So what happens here is that the bank collects or has deposits from several stakeholders, and it can give the loan to any of the private companies or to any of the corporate entities, right? So here in terms of short-term, providing short-term instrument or short-term loans, a CD is done or certificate of deposit is done so that it can be done very effectively and at a very fast pace, right? So earlier, what exactly happened is that if the bank does not, so what really is happening is that CD is a negotiated money market instrument and issued in the dematerialized form as a promissory note against the funds deposited at a bank or other eligible financial firms. So here there is a bank and it gets deposits from several entities. There can be private entities or some retail stakeholders, or then there can be financial, like say LIC. And then if there is any corporate which wants to take loans from the bank, so the banks in turn will take loans from them and then it will give it back to the corporate. So this instrument is called certificate of deposit, right? And this is given to the corporate and it is done on a short-term basis, which is close to less than 1 year. You can say that some money market instrument, right? Then you have Vishwas scheme. So recently, Vishwas scheme was launched in the 230th meeting of the Central Board of Trustees Employees Provident Fund. So understand what exactly is the concept of Provident Fund. So Provident Fund is a essentially saving scheme or saving scheme which provides for certain interest rate. Okay, so generally what happens is in the EPFO or the employees provident fund organization, both the employer and the employees and the employee is supposed to provide some sort of interest to the EPFO. Okay, but if they are supposed to contribute, say, let's say 12% to the EPFO, and the EPFO takes this amount and invest in equities or in any other things, so that in terms of retirement, after retirement or after a certain period, they will get back the employees that sort of fund. But what happens if the employer does not provide the amount to the EPFO in the designated time? Then it leads to problem of pendants, a problem of fines, and it can also happen that the employer does not provide for this money to the employee or things like that. So there can be multiple ways where this scheme cannot work. So this is essentially, it leads to litigation, and Vishwas scheme was launched essentially to reduce the litigation part through rationalized penal damages. So one of the major reasons for litigation has been the imposition of high rate of penal damages and for belated remittances of provident fund dues. And what is PF? As we have already discussed, it's a retirement savings scheme in which both the employer and employee contributes a fixed percent of the employee's salary every month. Duration, it will be operational for 6 months and is extended by another 6 months, right? So this is essentially to reduce the litigation measures. Next topic is tipping point. So warm water coral reefs have crossed their thermal tipping point, triggering irreversible dieback. So what exactly is the concept of tipping point? So tipping point are the thresholds that when exceeded can lead to significant change in the system of anything, in the state of any system. And they are interlinked, which means that crossing one area may accelerate collapse of others, creating a cascading impact. And that can also threaten the planetary stability. So the report has identified other planetary systems at risk, which is Amazon rainforest, Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, that is AMOC, subpolar gyre, SPG, and land permafrost and mountain glaciers, right? So all of these terms are important. We need to understand what is AMOC, how does circulation of water happens from tropical to that of the temperate regions, and how does it circulate or it leads to heat exchange. So if these processes are sort of cut back, or there is some sort of issues with respect to these planetary measures, then it can lead to tipping effect, right? Then the last news is about rhodamine B. So scientists have found an effective method to detect the toxic molecules such as rhodamine B using coffee ring effect. So what is coffee ring method? So if you place a coffee in any table or in any way, it leaves a stain like this, right? Circular stain. So what coffee ring effect says is that it is a spontaneous phenomena where the capillary flow from the center state, so from center it goes to the edges, a droplet pushes all solute towards the droplet's edges, right? So this concept was utilized for detection of toxic molecules, right? So this is an effect, and the same effect was utilized for detection of toxic molecules. But the problem was that these toxic molecules were used in a very small quantity, so it was very less cost efficient to provide for all these for removing these toxic molecules. Now this technique is going to have a tremendous impact on the removal of these toxic aspects. So what is rhodamine B? It is a water soluble fluorescent synthetic dye known for its bright pink color. Applications are scientific research, industries like textile, paper, and leather. At the same time, it is very toxic in nature. It may damage skin, eyes, and the other respiratory system. It is also carcinogenic, which means that it is cancer causing. Then it is also considered to be an environmental contaminant. It is reported to persist in water. Despite water soluble, it continues to stay in water. It is banned in products such as food and cosmetics, yet it has been used because of its bright pink color. So that is all for news today. Make sure that you also take the quiz that is being popped up in the screen right now and provide the solutions in the comment section. Thank you and all the best.